Hello everyone. In this video we will be creating a new page type. It's going to be a blog page. We will create a new blog page.php file in the same directory as our page, and it's going to use these classes here, so just take a second to copy these down. Now the blog page is going to have many articles, so we'll define a articles index in the has many array, and we'll point that to an article object class. We'll create that in a moment here, but we will start our new CMS fields, and we'll get the fields that are out of the parent with parent, the scope resolution operator, get CMS fields. Next we will insert a new tab, so we'll say fields insert after. We'll say new tab, and then we'll name this articles, and then after will be the field, and that's going to be a grid field that manages all of our articles. So say grid field create, and it will be articles, and we'll copy that down. That's just for the label, and then we'll fill it with the articles here. So we'll say articles, and then we will use the standard grid field record editor for our config. And then we just need to make sure we have a semicolon right here, and then a comma here after the tab parenthesis, and we'll say we'll insert this after content. This should be fields here, but after we have the new tab with the articles, we can just simply return the fields. Next we will create the associated article object class. So we'll do that in the same directory, and it extends a data object, and it will use all of these classes here. So go ahead and just take a second to copy these down. We will create these database fields, so we'll have a title, a URL segment, content, and an image URL. These three will be text, but content should be HTML text. In our has one, we need the associated blog page, so because we have a has many here, we need a has one for the blog page. And then we'll have an image here to showcase whenever we render this article. And now we will need to say that the article owns this image, that way it can show on the front end. Next, in our CMS fields, we will create an image field, and that will be an upload field. And we'll set that to our image. Next we will set the folder name on it, and we'll just call this article images, and then we will validate what types of files can get uploaded. So we'll say image field get validator, and then we'll say set allowed extensions, and that'll take an array, and we'll say JPG, JPEG, and PNG. Those should be good. Now, unlike the blog page and similar pages where we get the fields from the parent, we are returning a new set of fields, so we're going to say return field list create, and then we will put a semicolon there, and we will say a text field here, create, and this will be for the title, and then we will put our image field below that, and then we will say HTML editor field create for our content. Now if you dev build and then you click the add new button under the pages, you'll see a new blog page option, so we can create that. And then if you scroll down under the content here, you should see our article object tab here. Now you might have noticed that we did not create a field for the image URL or the URL segment, and that is because we want to automatically generate those. So we'll define a new function here It's going to be on before right. Then we will call parent on before right. Now we will set the URL segment. We'll say this URL segment equals. Now we want something that is a method of the site tree class, so we will use the injector API that SilverStripe provides to get an instance of that just for this field. So we will say injector inst get, then we will say site tree class, and then we will say generate URL segment, and we will generate it based off of the title. So this will basically create a lowercase hyphenated version of the title for our URL segment that will show in the top of the address bar in the browser. Next, we will set the image URL. Now, typically in a SilverStripe template, we wouldn't need to do something like this, but because we're using React, we want this as a simple string whenever we feed this as viewable data. So we will just say the image URL is equal to this image URL. Next, we will need to create a blog page controller, and it's going to be very similar to how we structured the page controller here, and we will feed viewable data, but we will also feed viewable data with articles and the article subroutes. Now we will copy the allowed action and the URL handlers out of the page controller and paste them in the blog page controller. But instead of this URL handler, we will say articles, and then we will put a variable here, say the article URL, and then we will say fetch viewable data, and this will also call the feed viewable data method similar to this here. So we'll actually copy this too. But we're going to add one more index here. So we need to have the articles here. So we'll say articles, and we will do it the same way we do the social links and call that to nested array method. So we'll say this articles to nested array, and then don't forget your comma. We will also want to feed in the URL segment of the blog page itself. That way, whenever we create these article subroutes, we can use the URL segment as a link. So it will have the new blog page and then the name of the article URL segment whenever we are viewing a specific article. And you'll see that in a little bit, but you can kind of see how this URL handler will handle that. Now, whenever we feature an article, we will just simply return some generated HTML using a standard SilverStripe template, but it will get loaded into the browser in an AJAX style. So what we're going to do is create a new URL handler for that. So instead of feed viewable data, it will be render article. And we will just get rid of this feed or fetch viewable data right there. And then we will need to allow that action. So we'll just copy this here. Next, we will define that render article method. So it will be public function render article. And we will start that, excuse me, those should be squiggly. We will start that with a conditional, and we will say this, this get request, and then we'll call AJAX or is AJAX to see if this is a fetch request. And if it is not, we will just simply return the blog page. Next, we will get the article URL. We will get that out of the request. So we'll say this get request, and then we'll say param article URL. Now you can see we will use the article URL route parameter. You can see this up here, and we will use that to get the article. So we'll say article equals article get filter, and then that'll take an array and we'll filter by the URL segment. And then we will use the article URL to filter that. And then we just want the first, or else it'll just return the query and not the actual article itself. Then we will say if article exists, and if it doesn't, we will again just simply return the blog page itself. But if the article does exist, we will return it in a template. So we'll say return article render with layouts article. And then we will just need to create this template. Now, next to the page template in our templates layouts directory, just go ahead and add this markup here for the article. Now we will make sure that we are running Webpack, so we will say npm run watch, and we will create a new component, and this is going to be for our blog page. So we can go ahead and copy most of the, well, all of the page.jsx, but we will rename this to blog page and name the file the same thing. Next, we will import a few things here. We will say import link and with router from React Router DOM. And this is so we can create links within our blog page to the individual articles. Next, we will add two more things to the state. So we will add the URL segment. Remember, we feed that within our feed viewable data method in the PHP blog page controller. We will also add article markup as an empty string, actually as an empty paragraph, but still a string. So that way we can have some kind of HTML markup before we select an article to render. We will also initialize all of the articles as an empty array, but this will get immediately changed whenever we load the viewable data that the controller feeds us. Now we will go ahead and define a method to render our article. So we will just call this render article, and it's going to be async. And we're going to test the current document location for the article subroute. So we'll say if, actually we will start a regex. We will say if article, and we have to escape the / here. It's going to be any number of letters here. .test to test this regex against a string. And for the string, we will use the document.location. Then if we are in a article subroute, we will set the article markup to the same as the Facebook loader here to have that loading animation while we're waiting for the article to render. Okay, and a few more edits to this regex. We would want a / here to indicate that this is a special kind of regex expression here, and this would be articles. Because this is going to be looking for the same route that we use here to render the article. After this, we can just open up a fetch request, and we will fetch from the current document location. So that's document.location, and then we will apply some headers here. This is going to be an object, and we will say x requested with, and then we will say XML HTTP request. And then we will put a .then callback here. And we will say response text, and then another one here. Then we will say response this set state article markup response. Okay, and then this is setting the state to the rendered article HTML here that we use the template here to get this markup. Okay, but if we are not in an article subroute, we will just remove the article markup. So to do that, we will just set the state back to the original state. So it would be article markup and then the empty paragraph tags. Now we will just go ahead and bind that method in the constructor. So we will say this dot render article equals this dot render article dot bind this. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but it just makes sure that the render article uses this component whenever it's calling this dot set state. And then we will also go ahead and just call that render article in the component did mount. Now we will also add a component did update method, and this is so whenever we change articles, we can re-render the article and send that fetch request out again. So we'll say component did update, and we'll have prev props as an argument, and then we will say if prev props, or excuse me, yeah, these should be prev props, plural. If prev props dot location dot key doesn't equal, and we'll be strict about it, this dot props dot location dot key, then we will say this dot render article. That way we're not creating any infinite loops, and we're checking that the prev props location doesn't equal the current location when we render the article. Now in our load viewable data, we can add the URL segment, and it's just going to be from the data, so we could just say URL segment, and the same thing with the articles. So we'll just copy this down and say articles. Okay, so in our JSX, we can go ahead and copy this dangerously set inner HTML that we use for the basic content, pull that down outside of this social links check, and we'll do this for our article markup. Next, we will add a check for the articles in the state, and we do this the same way that we did the site config social links here with this ternary expression here, and if there aren't any, we just return an empty string. But we can go ahead and put a heading in here, so we'll use an h2 tag. We'll say latest articles. Okay, and now we will create a unordered list, and we gave it the class name blog listing, and then we loop over them the same way we did the social links up here. So we call them map, and then we need to make sure that we pass in a key, and we just use the current index of the article out of the array. Okay, and now we will use our link component, and this is provided from the React router DOM. So we'll say link to, and this is kind of like an href. So we will say slash, and then we will use string templating. We'll say this dot state dot URL segment articles, and then the article dot URL segment. Okay, and then we will just close this off. And then on the inside, we will open up a paragraph tag for the title, and we'll just throw the article title in here. And then we will put an image in here, so we'll say div class name image container and then we will check for an image, so we'll say article dot image URL, and if there is an image we will render that, so we'll say source the article dot image URL, and the alt we will just put a string template in here with the article title, so we'll say article dot title, and then on the outside we'll just say image. Okay, and if there is none, we'll just go ahead and put that empty string down. Now you might have noticed that we are still exporting page when this is the blog page, so we're going to export the blog page, but we're going to export it with the with router wrapper. And if you remember, we imported that up here, and that passes these props here. So this component actually is aware of the current URL location because the document location is actually passed as a prop. Now in our index.jsx, if you scroll down here, you can see that we're only using the page component when we have a new component for the blog page type. So what we need to do is first import the blog page, and then we're going to define a new method called render switch, which is just going to be a switch statement essentially that returns a different type of component based off of the page type attribute that we pass in through the navigation. So we will put a page type argument in here, and we will say switch page type. We'll say case just a normal page. This will return the same as this right here. So we'll copy that, paste that right here, put a space there. That should be good. And then we'll copy this down again for the blog page. So we'll say blog page right here, and we will put a break on both of these. So now instead of always rendering a page, we can simply use that method. So we'll say in squiggly brackets, this dot render switch, and then we will say link dot page type. Now we're going to add these styles here, and I'm not going to go through all of these styles unfortunately because that would really stretch out the length of this video, but take a second to pause, copy all of this, and there's a few more down here, so yeah, that should be good right there. So go ahead and pause, unpause, and then pause down here to get this lower half. But once you have all of this, be sure to import that too. So we called that blog. Okay, excuse me, I have some issues with my switch statement here. You don't actually need this initial colon right there. And you also don't need this break right here, because if it was returning something, it would exit out of the switch statement. Just keep this last break just in case there is no valid option getting passed through, but we only are using pages and blog pages, so it should be okay. But just for good practice, I would put this last break in. And in our blog page fetch request, it looks like we need to wrap these in squiggly tags here. Also, while we're in here, this should be requested with. That's so this is Ajax check goes through. And one more thing, we actually called this article object. Okay, so I went ahead and created some articles under my blog page here. So I added some images, title, and some lorem ipsum text here. So if you publish those and go on your front end, you should see them aligned like this. You click on one, it shows a little loader, or the title here, and the image and the content. If we do this, it loads that, shows the little loader. And if we go back to the blog page, it just gets rid of the article markup. Now you can see, because we're using the React router, the history is actually being updated. So if we click on the third article from the second article, we go back, we actually get the second article loaded, despite most of this going on in the browser. So same thing happens if we were to refresh. Since we're on article 1, it'll still pull up the article 1 markup. Alright, so in the next video, what I think we're going to be doing is some things more so in the CMS. We're going to use a plugin called Elemental, and we're going to extend it to create our own type of component that we can render content with. I don't love how the articles are kind of hiding down here under the content, so we'll also create some tabs that would set this next to the content here, and you would be able to just click through those. So I'll catch you then.